What is going on, everybody? Welcome back into another episode of the CTW Podcast. I am your host. Join with me is a very special guest who you guys know here now pretty well. If you haven't heard of him, I don't think you're a Celtics fan, guys. Finn Sands from the Celtics Insiders are joining us in. Finn, how's it going? How are you doing, my man?
I'm awesome. I'm super excited for preseason and obviously regular season. So thank you for having me, Rob.
Of course, anytime. Guys, before I get started, I do want to say if you're not following us on all of our social medias, the whole teams and Finn's links will be down below in the description if you're watching this on YouTube. If you're listening to us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, guys, go over to our Instagram at Celtics Talk Weekly. You can find everyone's personals over there. Guys, I have a very special announcement to make. Celtics season is almost back, and you are ready to experience them live and in person. Well, look no further. SeatGeek has you guys covered for the best ticketing deals out there. They have two sets of ticket prices. Green means good and good value, and then the red tickets mean it's not so good and you should stay away from them. Guys, I use SeatGeek all the time when I go to my live events and the Celtics games. They are the best. Whether you're a Celtics fan or a music lover, they have every event you could imagine. Guys, when you check out, use code Celtics Weekly for $20 off your first purchase over at SeatGeek. Guys, very excited to be partners with SeatGeek. We just want to give them a quick shout out because again, I pick brands that I like to use, and I love SeatGeek, so they're super trustworthy, super awesome over there. But let's hop right into this, Finn. Again, like you said, super excited for the preseason. The Abu Dhabi Games, something new that's happening this year. The Celtics are going up against the Nuggets in a little game doubleheader action over there in Abu Dhabi. The two former defending champions look to battle it out now. I'm kind of excited for this because, yes, it's preseason, but when you have two teams that are defending champions going off against each other in Abu Dhabi, it feels like it's maybe just a little bit, more intense than your normal preseason game. What are you expecting to see out of the Celtics in terms of intensity levels for these first two games?
Knowing Joe Mazzulla, I know they're not going to come out soft.
Right.
Um, I think the focus is going to be the little things. And when you break that down, you first got to look at the starting lineup, just how they're meshing together. Um, like just being able to get those easy plays in, um, good shots, aggressiveness. Like I'm expecting Jaylen Brown to come out hungry. I don't care if
Oh,
it's
yeah.
preseason or not. I'm really interested to see Jason Tatum's jump shot, his confidence level after his interesting summer. I expect Drew Holiday and Derek White to be the Drew Holiday and Derek White we know, just super solid. And then just let everything else take care of itself. I think the starters will get a decent run in the first half. And in the second half, I think we'll probably see the Peyton Pritchard show, maybe some Lonnie Walker moments, and then just the rest of the bench getting some time as well.
Well, so you mentioned the starters, and obviously no Chris Stops here moving forward for the foreseeable future. And first 30-35 games, probably expect him out. So, in terms of what you're looking for starters, like you said, Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, looking for them to be aggressive, Derek White, Holiday, I'm less so, nervous about that. Do you think maybe, because this is something I've been thinking about, do you think Joe tries out that center starting spot with a different group, maybe in terms of, yes, Horford is your best option here out of those three of Cornette, Tillman and himself. But you'd figure you're looking with Al now entering what, year 18? You're trying to keep him fresh. You're trying to keep him, energized. Do you think Joe might kind of lean towards a Tillman or a Cornette here, especially in the preseason, see how they kind of work with the starters? Maybe find something there.
I mean, that's a really interesting point. I think that he's going to start with Al, especially in the first game.
Right.
I think then he'll start cycling guys in and just seeing how they merge together. Like, I think Tillman, he's a very underrated big man when it comes to like being skilled. So like he can pass the ball really well.
Mm-hmm.
And he can get in the post and do all of that. So I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if Tillman starts to get some reps with Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, and maybe even like in the second game or to start the second half, we'll see a guy like Kata, Cornette, um, or Tillman get that start. So I think there's definitely a chance, but right now I think that Joe just has the if it ain't broke, don't fix it mentality where
Right.
Horford is just so solid, so reliable, that he's going to get the look. I think back-to-backs, once the season comes around, is one will really be tested, and it's going to be really interesting to see who gets that spot.
Well, I don't know if you've been paying attention to the podcast this summer, or the lack there really of this summer, the past month. Um, but I have been super high on Tillman. I think that I've been comparing it to the Derek White situation because you obviously know this. When White got traded here, it was not the Derek White that we saw his second year here 2 years ago, the year that Malcolm Brogdon, and then he kind of elevated again the following year. So I kind of feel like with those midseason trades for the caliber of players in which Derek White and Tillman's obviously in a caliber much below White, but he was a starter for a playoff team and was contributing to at a pretty high level against the Lakers in 2022. So you figure that, like, for me, it's like, I'd love to see what Tillman can do this preseason, because I do think there is a real opportunity here with Porzingis out and Horford's legs kind of, you just not bad or anything. You just want to keep them fresh. You don't want to outuse Al Horford before the playoffs. I do think, alongside some other players who I'm going to talk about here, I'm excited to see what Tillman can do for us this year, because I think you might see another leap. And if you do, then I really think it can take that second unit to another level, because I love Cornette. I trust Cornette, but he's not as dynamic, and you can't do as much as you can with Tillman in terms of defensive strategies, offensive strategies, a little bit more one dimensional. It can pick and roll. He's very phenomenal there. Can stand in the dunker spot, do his work down there. But Tillman, you get that spacing factor, you get that switchability. You just get a little bit more Joe Mazzulla brand of basketball, I feel like, out of Tillman. So it will be interesting. But for you, what's a player you're targeting, your eyes going to be on this preseason? Because we know what Tatum and Brown and those guys are going to give us. I kind of feel like, with Lonnie Walker now, Baylor Shireman, we're going to talk about a little bit later. There are some players to pay attention to here, I feel like.
Mm-hmm. I mean, if we're talking about Tillman and having the value of a training camp, we might as well talk about Jaden Springer too, right?
Right.
This is a guy that got at the trade deadline, and somebody I've quite frankly been really high on ever since last preseason when he matched up against the Celtics. I just think Jaden Springer has a lot of potential on both ends of the floor. When you look at the defensive end, I mean, he's a dog. He reminds me a lot of Avery Bradley with the on-ball intensity. He's just got that mentality, and I'm really interested to see how he fits in. I feel like we really haven't seen him get his chance. And with the training camp under his belt and maybe some preseason action, I'm really interested to see how he fits alongside the Jays. Like, is he going to be bringing the ball up? Is he going to be playing off ball? How's the three-point shot looking? I mean, I know the defensive end, it's kind of inevitable what he brings. He's just a dog. But on the offensive side of the ball, what type of value is he going to bring? And I think that's
Right.
something that Joe Mazzulla is super interested in, and I am as well. So Jaden Springer would be the guy that I got my eye on.
Springer's a guy I tend to forget about, because he obviously deadline acquisition, but it was interesting because when Philly gave him to us, it was kind of like, it was hard to wrap my head around, because he's such a talented defensive player, like you said. And I feel like the one thing holding him back is, like, all right, because I feel like with the backup guards, it's so reliant on what can you do for me off ball. I think that's why you see a lot of Peyton Pritchard with that unit. It's because he's such a great off ball player. Um, I think if Springer can become the ultimate, and kind of like what O'Shea Brissett gave you, but I guess a smaller version of it, a cutter. I think, a guy that is going to make the backdoor cut, going to crash for the rebound, and again, like you said, that 3-point shot. How is that holding up after
Hmm.
another year under his belt in a training camp? So I definitely think Springer is a name that I'm interested in seeing, and then honestly, obviously, like the basic pick for me was Lonnie Walker, because again, I don't know if you were on the trade deadline special. I was all over Lonnie
Yeah,
Walker at the
I
deadline.
was too. Yeah, no,
You were
I thought for sure that they were going to make that move.
same here.
Yeah,
I thought, yeah,
yeah. I mean, it would have made sense, like for the second
yeah,
round pick or whatever. And I
right.
mean, I'm glad it's
But I
working
mean,
out right now. So,
Brad waited, and again, Brad's always one step ahead. It feels like, and he waited. So I like, yes, Lonnie. Obviously, I mean, quite frankly, I think he gets the most run out of that second unit. I think he's on the E10 deal for a reason. They're going to see how he fits, and we'll talk about Lonnie Walker a little bit later. But and we're gonna talk about this guy later too. Like I said, Baylor Shireman. This guy, I feel like, has a real opportunity for like a real role. And yes, it's probably a little bit. It's probably a year away from a real role. But if I go through and I watch his college tape, I'm like, wow, like this guy was, a Big East first team player at Creighton. He was 18 and a half points, 4 assists, 9 rebounds. He's big. He can shoot. He can pass. He can score with the ball in his hands. And as high as I am on Sam Hauser, and Sam's going to have his role, it kind of feels like Shireman might just give you a little bit extra offensively that you could tap into at times. So, I feel like for me, the guy I'm circling is Shireman for this for this preseason, excuse me, because I feel like there's a real role for that he could carve out for himself.
Yeah, I think with Shireman, I think his role becomes more prominent in a game where the Jays are getting rested. Like I do agree, he might be a more dynamic version of Sam Hauser, but I just don't think he's going to get the opportunity to show that unless they're
Right.
playing at Washington Wizards or Detroit Pistons. And honestly, I mean, there's a lot of bad teams in the NBA, so he might have more opportunities than we think. And to have that flexibility when Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum or Derek White or Drew Holiday, whoever it may be, when they're sitting out, to have that extra reliability on the bench is huge. And honestly, we saw last year with Pritchard and Hauser in those kind of, meaningless games, how important those guys really are. So I
Right.
hope Shireman gets those chances. But right now, I feel like the role he understands he has is anytime he gets on the court, he's diving on the loose balls. He's making those corner threes and he's doing all the little things. However, when we play those really bad teams like the Hornets or the Wizards, his role might look really different.
Right. Now let's hop back on Lonnie Walker here. Because I'm interested to know what you have to think. How much run do you see this guy getting this preseason? Obviously, I told you what I think. But what do you see? Like, how do you see Boston kind of trying out this Lonnie Walker experiment?
I think Joe's going to test him in different ways, kind of just like what Joe Mazzulla does. So in the first game, if I had to guess, like it would probably be nothing in the first quarter, maybe nothing in the first half, just at the end of the game with the second or third unit. And then I feel like he'll slowly make his way up. Assuming like the last couple of preseason games, the starters will sit. That's the game where Lonnie Walker's really going to get his chance. I think there's a couple games, maybe one or two preseason games where he'll get thrown in with the starters, maybe the second or third game. But I think Joe's just going to try to throw him in different lineups, show him different rotations because that's the reality of his role if he makes the team. He's going to
Right.
have to be ready for all the above, whether it's getting DMPs, playing with the starters, or being the guy.
Right. So, what do you think he needs to show them this preseason to because he is on the E10 deal, right? And there's, he was asked on media day, what his thoughts on camp are, and apparently him and Brad have already, or I'm sorry, on potentially playing up in Maine. And he said that him and Brad have already talked about it, and he's willing to do what he has to do. He was very very enthusiastic about it, very very well said what he had to say. But what do you think? What does he need to show you? Or the Celtics, I guess, in this case, in order for for them to convert it to a full time guaranteed contract.
Yeah, I just think it comes down to a little bit of everything, how he can play with the Jays specifically. Obviously, I feel like he said it like 20 different times in during camp, but he's a microwave scorer, and I feel like
Yeah.
we all know that. We know he can score, but how well can he play off ball and catch and shoot? How well is his on ball defense? His cutting around the Jays? How good can he be without the ball in his hands? And then defense is definitely the priority for me. Like, can he slide? Can he switch? Because I feel like we all know what he can bring on the offensive end. It's just more how can he fit alongside the key guys and how well can he defend?
Right. For me, I think it's him buying into the winning culture.
Hmm.
And I say that, and it's because, like, I've said this, and I'm probably going to back it up. He's the most talented player we have on the bench. Like, just offensively speaking, what he can do with the ball in his hands, athletically from behind the arc, go get a bucket like mentality. There is no one that can do it better off this bench than Lonnie Walker can. Now, I do think there are people that fit this system and this scheme and what we have going on much better. Right? I think Hauser's role is very hard to, replicate. You can't throw Hauser on the Brooklyn Nets and have Hauser kind of have that same impact that he has. Pritchard, I think, is a different story. I think you can throw Pritchard onto a bunch of teams and he can do a lot with the ball in his hands. But, with that being said, I'm looking for Lonnie to be like, you're coming in, you're with the defending champs, with a team that's running it back, you have no role. Are you willing to sacrifice? Are you willing to, like you said, are you willing to get a coach's decision to not play? Are you willing to step up and play 30 minutes, which, most players are? So I think that's what I'm looking for, Lonnie. And I love what you said about Joe testing him, because I think Joe's going to test him in all different ways. And I so agree with that, where, you might see him play 30 minutes one preseason game, and then Joe might purposely bench him the next game and not have him touch the court, just to see where his mind's at and how he reacts and what his body language is. And, all this stuff, that stuff matters when, you're bringing a guy who is a question mark, because we don't know how Lonnie Walker is around this team or with those guys. The chemistry's not there. I think that's Joe's plan of attack. Now, second part, or I guess third part to this question, and maybe this is a crazy question, but this is a real thought I have. Do you see a world where Lonnie Walker this year is playing a 6-man role for us?
I don't think so. I don't see that. I
You
just
don't see
think
it.
that Joe's so consistent with his lineups. I feel like he's gonna keep the casual starting five, and Horford, when Porzingis is healthy, Horford back off the bench. But I just think he has so much trust in Sam Hauser and Peyton Pritchard that they're still going to get the looks before Lonnie Walker, unless you prove something crazy, which I don't think will happen. Like, I think Lonnie will have his moments, but I just think that coming off a championship, there's no reason to take away Peyton Pritchard and Sam Hauser's role just based on how dominant they were last season.
Right. No, and that's very, very fair to say, because I think, again, if you're Joe Mazzulla, you got to be fragile with this whole thing, right? You don't want to, dismantle what already is very sound core. Um, but I guess Lonnie, it'll be interesting because, again, there's going to be nights, I think, where maybe the Celtics don't have it offensively. And I think that's when Joe's going to turn to him, because, again, as much as I love Peyton Pritchard, there is a size disadvantage that plays into Pritchard in certain matchups. So I think it'll be interesting to see how we use Lonnie, especially in, bigger games. I wouldn't expect, because it's weird too, because it's like, it's really so interesting, is why I'm really tuned into this preseason as much as I'm gonna be, is because I'm really looking at Lonnie Walker, because it's like, you've seen this guy play big time moments, right? He had
Hmm.
those games in LA where he showed up in the playoffs, like he can do that. So it would feel like a waste almost if he makes the roster just to like not touch him at all. But then there's that side of me, like what you just said, where it's like, well, hold on, let's pump the brakes. Pritchard was phenomenal last year. Hauser was phenomenal last year. You don't want to, mess anything up. So it's a fragile, fragile way to handle it, I feel like.
Right. It makes me wonder how much of a signing it was from Joe versus Brad,
Right.
because like it gives me that Brad Stevens mentality where it's just like having that extra guy on the bench. Like Brad's always had that tendency when he was a coach to, if it wasn't going right, like he would randomly throw Carson Edwards in the game just to spice it up. Or
Right.
like in the 16-17 season, like Gerald Green didn't really play all season, and then there would be some moments where he was just needed. So Brad Stevens kind of always liked having that utility guy on the bench where you could just throw him in.
Right.
And I'm wondering if that's going to be the same for Joe. But I mean, it's hard to tell just because of Joe's rotations, and I feel like Joe likes to keep consistent. So I'm really interested to see how that develops.
He does, but you know what? I will say, I think he developed that this postseason. Because round one against Miami, you saw no Tillman. It was all Cornette. He was doing a phenomenal job on Bam. And then we switched things over out against Cleveland, and it's like, all right, well, again, a little bit less of Cornette, a little bit more Tillman, and they kind of switched it up. They kind of added a little bit more Tillman, and then you played the Pacers, and Tillman and Cornette just couldn't keep up with their speed and their athleticism. So then he was like, all right, boom, O'Shea Brissett time, and Brissett got
Hmm.
some run against the Pacers. And then the finals, you kind of saw it was a little bit more leaning towards Tillman. So it was like he was playing around, and he was, and I think that's the growth of Joe. I don't think you see that from Joe his rookie year. I think that was Joe making progress. So I think most realistic take is Lonnie Walker ends up kind of as like an O'Shea Brissett role, where he
Yep.
kind of fills in, where it's okay, a series against I don't know, Indiana, for example, honestly is a great example of this, super fast pace, 3-point reliant teams going to score a lot of points. Maybe for 15 minutes a game, you're going to get Lonnie Walker in there to get you 12 points or 10 points and, kind of keep the bench unit afloat offensively. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes because, I do think there is a real opportunity there. Now, before we hop into the Around the Hardwood segment, because I do think that one is going to be a real. Yeah, we got some big news. The easiest way to be said. I'm interested to hear your rotation for the second unit with Porzingis out. So obviously you have the starting five that you mentioned, right? With White, Holiday, Brown, Tatum, Horford. Do you think that second unit is set in stone? It's Cornette, it's Hauser, it's Pritchard, and then Cornette until they switch.
Yeah, I mean, I think Joe's going to keep it consistent from last year. I think something that I'm interested to see, like as we talked about earlier, the guy that I'm really interested in watching in preseason is Jaden Springer.
Right.
Like I think Springer or Shireman, just like being able to sneak in and steal some minutes is definitely something to watch. Like kind of like the O'Shea Brissett type of role. And I guess Lonnie Walker's in that debate too, if he makes the team. It's just like who's going to get those couple of minutes because I definitely think that Joe puts a lot of trust into Pritchard, Hauser, and Cornette, and Tillman too, probably at this point. So I think the really only question mark is the other, which would be the couple guys that I just mentioned.
Right. And something I've kind of been talking about this past month is you have way more flexibility this year in terms of like pressure around the organization if you're Joe Mazzulla, because every game last year in the year prior was looked at since we lost the finals, even a little bit before that, it was looked under a microscope. Every game it felt like if they lost it, it was the end of the world. So, I'm looking for Joe in terms of rotations this year. Play around. You're the champions. You don't have to listen, right? Even though he didn't let it affect him, but maybe it did. You never know. But play around a little bit because you have that flexibility where yes, the regular season is important, but you're the defending champs. You've done it before. You know what it takes. If you drop a game on an October night or a November night because you're playing around with the lineup and you figured out it doesn't work or maybe it does work, I think you gain a lot more out of that. And I think if you're Joe, be a little bit experimental this year. Play around a little bit. See what if you can find a little hidden gem you weren't able to find last year because you didn't want to, steer away from the championship. But it'll be interesting to see because it's a whole
Mhm.
different, and it's something I've said. It's a whole different, especially from like an analysis and analytical and all that stuff. How we look at the game because we are fans, but we try to look at the game a little bit differently because we cover the Celtics. It's a little bit different now. Now that you're the defending champions, the game changed for us too, and it changes for Joe. So it'll be interesting.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, dude, like if they can get a game where Tatum or Brown only have to play like 24, 26 minutes, that's significant.
Yeah,
Mess around with the rotations, test what works, find some hidden gems, build confidence, and by the time playoffs comes, it can make all the difference. So
yeah,
definitely.
absolutely. So this up next, it's time for Around the Hardwood segment. We talk about, we go around the league and look at how teams and, players are holding up. Some news, and we have some big news we haven't got a chance to talk about. Friday night, it was shams because we unfortunately Woj isn't, working with us or not with us, but under ESPN anymore. Broke some big time news. Karl-Anthony Towns gets shipped off to the New York Knicks in exchange for Julius Randle, a Detroit Pistons first round pick, alongside Dante DiVincenzo. Now, Finn, I need to hear your initial thoughts, your takeaways, because before you give them to me, it kind of feels like New York is trying to take what the Celtics have done and copy their blueprints. What do you think of this trade?
I mean, I feel like there's a lot of different ways to look at it, especially from the Knicks perspective. Like Cat's an elite player. Like his floor spacing ability is elite. It's definitely going to open the floor up for Jaylen Brown. I mean Jalen Brunson, sorry. Now that Randall's gone and they got Cat shooting the ball. So I think that's definitely like a really good proponent. I feel like the Knicks, they lost a lot of depth though. Like I'm not sure who's going to be coming off the bench for them. I don't know if Josh Hart will be starting, but if he is, like their bench is kind of looking weak. And then just going man for man with the Celtics, I still like Boston. I really
Right.
do. I think, when you look at it and you really break it down, is Cat better than Porzingis? I mean, on any given night, either of them can be better. I still like Derek White and Drew Holiday on Brunson and whoever the starting two guard is. And give me Jalen Brown and Jason Tatum over McKell and OG any night.
Yeah, I agree with you. No doubt. If we're looking at it from an Celtics versus Knicks aspect, obviously I'm going to touch. We're going to touch on the from Minnesota side of things. But if I'm looking at a Celtics Knicks, Cat doesn't move the needle for me because yes, he presents some floor spacing, which is great. But if we're talking defensive end of the floor, that's a guy that the Celtics are going to be able to target coming down for 48 minutes and put him in every single action. And I think, in a playoff series, it's a chess match, and that might not be a matchup that is suited for Cat. On the flip side, again, you opened up the floor, and most importantly, out of this whole thing, you got some size. Yes, Cat isn't your traditional center, probably the greatest 3-point shooting center of all time, though. But if you're New York, you're feeling after losing Hartenstein in that size, you're feeling really good about the spacing aspect of this thing with the size, which is going to open up opportunities, I think, for Josh Hart to kind of swoop in and do his thing on the glass. So, I do see the appeal from New York side of things. In a matchup versus Boston, 6 games, still is what
Yeah.
I'm holding my hat down on.
Yeah.
I don't think it moves it much. I think Randall and I think Cat are the same tier of player. I think one just presents a little bit more size.
Yeah. I feel like there's also appeal for this trade for Jason Tatum. Jason Tatum's always done so well in his career against Cat, especially on the perimeter. Like I think I read something that he's averaging like 30 something points against Cat in his
35, I want to
career.
say
Yeah,
35.
and that's just ridiculous. I mean, I just going back to the game in December, January, the overtime game in at TD Garden against the Wolves, Jason Tatum picked on Karl-Anthony Towns on the perimeter, got to the rim, used incredible footwork, got some open three-pointers, and I mean, I could just see like the Celtics abusing that pick and roll. And if I'm not mistaken, I think Karl-Anthony Towns fouled out in like 20 something minutes that game. So
Yep.
um, I think that's a whole different aspect for the Celtics where they're just going to go at him.
Let's look at the Minnesota side of things now, because this is the side of the trade that I love. Because I think Minnesota, they had such a great year last year. Anthony Edwards was an ascending star, and as much value I think as Cat held to that team, it felt like kind of that Gobert and Cat tandem they had put together just wasn't it didn't make any sense to me. Because quite frankly, Gobert had a great year last year. As much hate as he gets, it feels like in the basketball community, obviously with Shaq and all this, like he had a very successful playoff and a very successful regular season. Obviously, defensive player of the year. Despite it probably should have gone to Wembenyama, despite him only being a rookie. But it felt like it was just not it wasn't working. It made no sense, right? It's like you have Cat, you have Gobert, and then off the bench you have Naz Reid, and so it's like it feels like you always just kind of have this spacing issues. Then you go out and what do? You go get kind of, in my opinion, a smaller version of Karl-Anthony Towns that I think is a little bit more valuable on the defensive end, is a little bit quicker, is a little bit faster. I think can kind of play off of Anthony Edwards a little bit better. So, and then on top of that, you add DiVincenzo and a little bit more depth and experience to that bench that, is kind of inexperienced with Nickeil Alexander-Walker and the new draft pick, Rob Dillingham. So I think, and Naz Reid, who's the sixth man of the year, and then you add DiVincenzo to that team. It feels like now, if you're looking at the Minnesota side of things, Finn, I feel like their window to maybe make a run at the finals just opened up even more than it did prior.
Yeah, I think time will only tell with this one. I think it's got potential to be like one of the biggest hit or misses we've seen in recent history.
Yeah.
Uh, I look at Julius Randle and I think like, wow, he obviously Julius Randle can get you 25 and 10 on any given night. But I think him and Ant are both ball stoppers. They both like having the ball in their hands and they play a lot of isolation basketball. and I'm really interested to see how they work off of each other because I'm not sure if Julius Randle will like standing in the corner a whole lot, and I'm
Right.
not sure Anthony Edwards will as well. I also think that there might be some question marks with that starting lineup in floor spacing, like McDaniels,
Yeah.
Randle, and Gobert are all, especially Gobert. Obviously, he's not going to shoot any threes, but I'm really interested to see how they can develop um, because I'm not sure on the perimeter they're going to be the best offensive team. So that's definitely something to keep an eye on. But at the same time, like they got a lot of talent on paper. And if Ant can continue to develop, become a little bit more of a playmaker, I mean, they definitely have a lot of potential, no doubt about it.
I think that, I mean, I'm interested. Where do you see, because personally, I think they're probably, I think entering this year, I was a little nervous on them because I think last year was, I think like this upcoming year was their kind of chance to like come back down to earth a little bit. It felt like they kind of, overdid it last year in terms of expectations and what they ended up doing, obviously making the Western Conference Finals. I feel like, and again, maybe I'm a little high on this trade, but I feel like now it's like the Thunder and then the Timberwolves as 1 and 2. And then like obviously I don't want to discredit what Denver can do and what Jokic is capable of because they will be there in the playoffs and in the mix. But it feels like now where I thought Minnesota was kind of in that category of like Phoenix and in that mix, does this trade at all kind of in your mind elevate them ahead of those teams, or are they still kind of in that mix for you?
Yeah, I still think they're in that mix. Like I think they might have a really successful regular season,
Right.
uh, and get one of those top seeds. But until I really see it, I'm still not sure that they're gonna be able to take down Jokic in a playoff series again. Or depending on how good OKC is this season, I'm not sure they'll be able to beat them. But I think I just feel like the spectrum of how good they can be is so wide right now that it's really hard to tell. And I think
Right.
15 games into the season, when we'll be talking about this in November, I feel like we'll have a much better feel.
That is true. Because again, you got to see how they play together, in their play styles. But I do think it'll be very interesting to see. I think they shook things up a little bit in the West, and then from an Eastern Conference standpoint, I think New York is probably right up there with Philly and Milwaukee. I want to say I'm hesitant to say Milwaukee, in that kind of like fighting for that second seed threshold. Now think talking about that, alongside that trade, we got to see, yesterday was the media day for the rest of the league. We got to see kind of Paul George with his first look in his new threads, his number 8 in Philly. Um, this one is very interesting to me with the Philly because if you want to say wait and see, I think Philadelphia might be the biggest definition of wait and see there is in the league. Because yes, they did add some star power and Paul George, but I will say, I think there are real question marks with this team in terms of being able to stay healthy. How do you think the Sixers' chances coming into this year are, with the addition of Paul George?
I mean, Paul George is still Paul George. Like he's an elite player. And the 76ers could very well start out the season 25-10 or whatever. But it really doesn't matter because their health is such a question mark. Like their regular season success won't matter, and all that matters is how healthy they'll be come April time, and that will always be the concern with them, no matter how good of a regular season team they are. So
Right.
like for Philly, like I won't be moved until it's the second or third round of the playoffs, and they got a completely healthy squad. And honestly, I think you can make that argument for a lot of the teams, and not just in the NBA. But I mean, the East specifically, like the Knicks too, Tibbs has a tendency to run guys to the ground. So I think a lot of it will just come down to who's healthy. And I'm not sure I trust the Knicks and Tom Thibodeau. And I'm definitely not sure I trust Embiid and Paul George. I'll tell you that.
I got 3 words for you, man. I'm sorry, Philly, but second round exit. I'm sorry.
Facts.
I'm sorry. It's been the trend that you guys have had, but it feels like everything's trending in that direction. I can see it now. Embiid goes down around end of March or mid March, and then you go into the playoffs and you got some momentum in the first round, and it just injuries derail your year. And I do think Maxi and Paul George and Joel, when they're going to be all playing together, that's a tough big three, to keep up with in terms of offensively. that, I mean, the firepower wise, I mean, Embiid can get you 30, Maxey can get you 30, really 40. They can all get you 40 on any given night. But like you just said, injuries. I mean, I don't know how long they're going to be able to play on the court together. And I think you've seen it in Philly before with the Harden trial and then the Jimmy Butler trial. And then it felt in the whole Ben Simmons trial. And it just felt like with Philly, it's like, this is their last go ditch effort. I think this is their last chance. If it's not this year, if they can't break through this year, then I think it's time to clean house, because especially in I know it's around the hardwood, but we are a Celtics podcast, especially when you look at their matchup against Boston and what their history is. It's like, do you really see this team? And the thing is, right, Finn, unless one either or of the Sixers or Celtics fall below the top 3 seeds, and quite frankly, I think they're both locks for top 3 seeds. I think Boston can be a 60-win team easily, and I think Philly can easily get over 55 wins, 53 in that area, which in the East will be good enough for a top 3 seed. Um, all signs most likely point to these two teams, if they do match up in the regular or postseason, to be in the Eastern Conference Finals. And it's like, do you really see Philly's legs even making it past like a full 7 games in the second round? It's like, I just can't see it.
Yeah, I mean, history repeats itself, right? It's just same thing we see every year. Joel Embiid, when the Celtics played the 76ers in the 2023 Eastern Conference semifinals, we already saw it with Joel Embiid. He missed game 1. I don't think he really looked like himself the rest of the series.
Yeah.
You also have to consider the fact that usage rates go up in the playoffs, and you need your star guys more than ever. And it's just hard to say that Joel Embiid will be that guy,
Right.
or Paul George will be that number 2 guy they need. It's always like some dumb hamstring injury or wrist injury that they have that holds them back. And until I see otherwise, like there's no reason to believe that anything will be different this year.
Well, I mean, Embiid's gotten hurt the past 2 years now, pretty much at identical times. I mean, this year against New York, he was just absolutely hobbled with that knee injury, that he re-aggravated in that series. And then 2 years ago, like you said, against Boston, he didn't play game 1. Philly lucked out and got a win thanks to a Celtics collapse. Um, but like, I mean, he just looked terrible all series, and then until eventually a game 7 where he just crumbles in a game 7 because his body just kind of gives out on him. So, you know, I could see Philly being a very dangerous regular season team. I mean, gosh, a very, very dangerous regular season team. I don't see it really being much more than that. Because quite frankly, I think the East is, and I think, quite frankly, I don't even think I can say it's biased anymore, but it's the Celtics up here, and then everyone else below them is, I think everyone's gunning for second place. And between you and me, I think the more important and more intriguing things outside of New York in the Eastern Conference, in my opinion, are teams like the Magic, the Pacers. I think those two teams are like way, way more interesting entering next year than a team like Milwaukee or a team like, Philly, just because, those guys, right? You know what you're going to get out of Embiid at this point, right? He's reached the peak of his career. Same thing kind of goes for Giannis, right? And Dame, and Paul George, all these players. It's like you've seen them at their peak. They're probably, except Giannis, they're probably coming on the decline now, or they're starting to. Teams like Orlando and teams like Indiana, and you saw it last year with Indiana. Maybe you see it next year with Orlando. It's like, no, they're on the come up. Paulo's only getting better. Tyrese is only getting better yearly. So, where are you at? How realistic do you think, a team like Indiana or Orlando again makes a run and kind of takes down one of those
Hmm.
teams?
Yeah, Paolo. We saw the year 2 leap with Paolo, and for me, the year 3 leap is where you really see like how good an NBA player is. And Paolo Banchero to me has shown so many signs of being legit. Um, he
Most
had that
slept on
break in,
star in the league.
yeah,
I
I
feel like
mean,
not
he
talked
had
about.
that break in playoff series. I mean, he struggled a little bit against Cleveland, but just to have that under his belt in year 2 will make all the difference for year 3. Also, Franz's development, I'm sure he's only going to get better.
Yeah.
Jonathan Isaac, who's dealt with health problems, he's finally healthy. He put on some weight this offseason. So I really think I could see them clicking. I mean, we saw Indiana, the potential they have.
Right.
Tyrese Halliburton's obviously going to only get better. I mean, he was around the Olympic players all summer. His confidence has to be pretty high. Siakam just got an extension. Same, I mean, Nemhard obviously looks really good, especially against the Celtics.
Yeah.
So
Jeez.
yeah, I mean, they're exciting. Like, I feel like any of those teams could put up a fight with the top dogs in the East, and I think Orlando specifically is the team that I will definitely keep my eye on.
Yeah, I think Orlando's kind of got like a mini Celtics duo. Jalen Brown just team got going for them. Obviously, I don't think Franz can become the player in which Jalen Brown has because, quite frankly, Jalen Brown has exceeded my expectations and who he's become. I mean, he's a top 15, arguably top 10 player in this league at this point in his career. I don't know if France can get there, but I will say Paulo has an opportunity, I think, to be one of the league's best players, like where he's talked about, just like Jason Tatum is right now. Um, he's so good. He's 6'9", 6'10". He's probably 230, 240. He can score inside at will. If he can develop a consistent jump shot, which I think that's probably the next tool he adds to his
Mhm.
toolbox. If he can do
And limit
that,
the turnovers. The turnovers.
right. And who does that sound like? It kind of sounds like Jason Tatum a little bit. A big problem with Tatum, and less so the 3-point shooting, because quite frankly, that's a new problem we're seeing out of JT. But the turnovers were a big thing for both Brown and Tatum. And when I was watching Cleveland, Orlando this year, I was sitting there and I was like, God, these two guys are mini Brown and Tatum. Potential wise, I think that they can unlock that. So it'll definitely be interesting to see how the East stacks up and especially how the West stacks up. Very exciting to start finally talking about basketball as we are just 3 days away from the Abu Dhabi games. The Celtics, the defending champs, are back in action. Finn, are you gonna go to ring night? Do you think you'll be able to make it out there?
I don't think so, unfortunately.
You don't think you're gonna be able to make it?
No. I wish, bro. I really wish.
I'm not, I can't do it either. I'll be at home covering the game, but it's exciting. The season's finally back. Like Joe Mazzulla said, the attack on 19 is beginning, and I love that mentality. I love that approach. Finn, before we close out, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us, hopping on the podcast. It's always a pleasure. It's always a great time, guys. Thank you so much for watching or joining us wherever platform you're watching us or listening to us on. We will see you guys next week. And before we close out, I just want to say if you're not following us on our social medias, go do that right now. We appreciate all the support you guys have been showing. You guys know the drill. Until next time,